Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Cricket Coach for this big bumper preview of the upcoming Fantasy T20 Blast on the cricket draft. A new game means new tactics, new graphics, and new content. So today I'm going to cover some of those tactics with point scoring and some fixtures, and then look at how you should be looking to set up your team. A quick Q&A before talking about some of the players you might want to look at or not look at. So thank you very much for being here. Let's get stuck straight into it. And I think, first of all, from the top, I want to look into the functionality of the game. Some key features and rules that are really important to know so you can try and have the best strategy and maximize your points. So I think here, one of the biggest things to look at is the points to be scored as a strike rate bonus, as you can see at the bottom of the list here. If your player strikes over 140, then they'll earn multipliers on the points, on the runs that they score. This is massive, I think. It means that basically means strike rate is really, really valuable when considering which players to bring in. As if they have like a high strike rate in their innings, their runs could be up to tripled what the original value would be. And so to help visualize this a little bit, I've created a couple of scenarios here that should help sort of explain what I mean. So in this scenario, we've got player A scores 80 off 60 balls, which would roughly score them around 170 points, depending on the number of sixes they hit and such. But based on the strike rate, I think would score about 117 points. Whereas a player who hit a quick fire 40 off just 17 balls would score about 147 points roughly. So this means that even though they scored half the amount of runs, because of their strike rate, they score far more points. Basically, what this means for your team is that there's a really big emphasis on selecting explosive players that can go big rather than consistent players who maybe aren't T20 specialists. Also, looking at the bowling points on offer here, I'm not sure it's quite the same. Having a sub-6 economy rate in T20 is exceptional and I think a little bit more rare. And that only yields an extra 25 points. So again, a fifer here, which is pretty rare in T22, is only an extra 50 points. So I think all the multipliers for batting make a much bigger difference to the overall point scoring and the route to get points than the bowling multipliers. This might also mean that putting a bit more emphasis on batting heavy teams could be good. I'll get to a bit of that later. But yeah, I think that strike rate bonus is a really important thing to know going into this season. Trying to pick those players with the best strike rate rather than just maybe more consistent players. I think it's really important. So next up is a super important segment and a bit of a long one. Fixture planning. The way the cricket draft has decided to do the fixtures this year essentially means that each week, each team will play a different amount of fixtures. So as you can see on the screen here, a player could be playing 3 games one week and then just 1 the next week. Shout out to Alex W on X for these graphics as well. Top job. So for some of these teams, such as Essex and Worcestershire, this makes no real difference. They'll play 2 a week. But for some teams such as Glamorgan and Derbyshire that play 2 triple game weeks and 2 single game weeks in the first 4 rounds, it means that you have to be really careful about who you pick and what the right time is. So timing on players is super important in this game. This is probably a good time to mention as well that in the cricket draft and just fantasy sport in general, I think an extra game in a week is huge. It's so advantageous that you'd almost want to play a semi-decent cheap option who plays 3 games in a week over a good but expensive option that only play 1 or 2 in that week. Obviously, that's very situational, but you get the idea about how important these extra fixtures and getting that right is. So this next bit might get a little bit complicated as we look at who you should target based on the fixture numbers in the opening stint of the blast. So feel free to skip ahead in the video if you don't fancy the mind melt potential here. I'll be using this other graphic for this, which shows in that middle column how many fixtures each team has in the first 3 weeks of the blast, which is about as far ahead as you probably want to be thinking and planning before the season starts. So starting from the off, Gloucestershire are the biggest losers here, with only a single game week and the rest doubles for the rest of the season. I would try and avoid them if you can, which is pretty difficult because they have some really good assets, such as David Payne, who was a top scorer last season, or James Vince, but that's a judgment call based on how well you think they're going to start the season, and if having 1, 2, or 3 less games than other bowlers and batters will make a difference and will matter enough. I think I'm going to personally try and avoid Gloucestershire players just for the fixture count, but they do have some good assets. If you want to go there, you can, but that's just something to consider. On the other end of the spectrum, you have 7 teams that have 7 fixtures in the first 3, with Glamorgan and Derbyshire having back-to-back triples. I think this is a massive opportunity to get ahead early in the rankings and get up those rankings quickly by attacking these fixtures, as it's the only time all season that this happens. So while they only have like one fixture in the first like game week, having a bench full of their players and using transfers after game week one, you could really be looking at maximizing your allotted three players from each of those teams. It's an interesting tactic, and again, it's a little bit specific. So I wouldn't. Maybe you don't have to go there, but I think I'm going to try it at least. So for specific players, I'd be looking at Gazanfar, Smale, Ingram, maybe Donald as well. Admittedly, neither of these sides have any really outstanding players who make it near to the top of the points charts over the last year, but. And I don't even have any guaranteed picks in there, but I think a new season brings new opportunities. And if you can select those right players, it could really pay off with back-to-back triples. A quick note as well is that the after game week four in the game, you get extra free transfers, which is pretty nice. So if it's been a bit of a tough start to the season, you can make some bigger changes in your team, and this could be a really good opportunity to get out those Derbyshire and Glamorgan players after their back-to-back triples and get some other players in as well. Some other teams to look at for the start of the season, I think, are those with the 7 in that middle column here. Birmingham, Leicestershire, Northants, Notts and Yorkshire, because none of them blank until game week 4 or later. So they're pretty safe bets early on for fixtures. And I'd be looking to have the majority of my team come from these sides, I think. Lancashire are the only team to triple in game week 1, so I'd also be looking to starting your season with 3 Lancashire players in there. You can get rid of these players after game week 1 another time if you don't like them, but I think starting with them is pretty good to try and start the blast pretty well and take advantage of those fixtures. So the final bit of this section is how well the fixtures fit into your overall strategy. So what do these kind of fixture mean for overall strategy? Essentially, as a general rule, I think with 3 transfers each week, you want to be using them on players that have a single game week and bringing in players who have a double or triple game week each week. Obviously, core players and players performing well and those who you don't want to leave out on, benching them is always an option. You don't have to get rid of those. But I think if you can use those transfers to naturally turn your team around and have a sort of turnover of players having 3 game weeks, then that can mean each week you could be having 3 or 4 more games. And then over the season of 7 weeks, minus finals day, of course, that could be, I don't know, maybe an extra 20 fixtures in the season, which is going to make a big impact on your overall result. That's going to have a huge difference on your overall points by the end of the season. So I hope that made sense. I know it's a little bit complicated, but I think really targeting these fixtures in the right way come the end of the season could have a big effect on your overall rank, and that starts now in the pre-season time. So the final thing to say here is also because of the fixture count, these game weeks can be really quite long and unpredictable. Rain and the variability in 11s that you can get in T20 cricket, I think, place a higher value on picking players who are almost guaranteed to start. You don't want to be picking someone who's on the outskirts of a team, which in the county championship is probably okay because you'll know if they're going to play or not at the start of the game week when the team sheets come out. But in the T20 Blast, you could be punished with them playing the first of the game week, but then missing the other 2 games. And therefore, you're just missing out on big points there. So I think it's just something to think about. And if you're not sure if your player is going to play or not, maybe it isn't worth the risk. And you might want to go for someone who's more nailed in their 11. So moving on to taking a hit in the Blast. And I think it's very different to taking a hit in the county championship. I think minus 75 in the Blast goes a lot further than in the county championship. Obviously, in the county championship, you get 2 goes at it. And so, while there are more fixtures per week in the Blast, there's more likelihood of having less game time, less game involvement. A bowler only bowling 2 in the game because the other team chased the score down quickly, or a batter who normally bats 4 or 5 might not do anything in the whole game because the top order batters do really well. So there are more, I think overall as well, there are just more low scores, which means the minus 75 can make a bigger difference. I mean, I'm not a fan of taking the hit anyway, but in the Blast, even less so, because the average score per player is normally a little lower. But the hit, the minus 75 stays the same. That doesn't get any lower, but the points do. So you can see here, I put on the screen the average points per game from the county championship and the T20 Blast last season of those who played the majority of games. In the county championship, it was between 190 and 220 points, really. Whereas in the Blast, in the same category, it was more like 100 to 110. That's significantly less points on offer in general. And so I think those hits feel a little bit different. They feel a little bit heavier. And so normally I'm against them, but I think especially now in the T20 Blast, I would really not recommend taking its hits as much as you can, really, because getting that minus 75 back is going to be a lot harder, I think. So moving on to the makeup of the team, maybe starting off the top here, subs, I think, and bench cover is a little more important than in the county championship. In the county championship, you don't really need to have any playing subs on your bench because teams are fairly stable and you can use transfers to get a full 11 each week. Whereas I think in the Blast, maybe it's a little bit more important to have a bench cover because there can be more chops and changes in the team in T20 cricket. So having one or two decentish players on the bench could be pretty useful. Also, as discussed earlier with the fixtures, the variation in teams throughout your fantasy team, as in the certain teams that your players play for, having those some variation in that on your bench can mean that targeting those fixtures can be a little easier. Being able to look at your team for an upcoming game week and see you have a player who's on your bench and has been all season, but has 3 fixtures this week can be a really big win and sort of help you look elsewhere in your team to improve. So I think having a more substantive bench in the Blast is much more important, and maybe some more variation in the teams your players play for. Therefore, sort of on the back of this, finding those cheap players is super important when building your team. So having, we're looking at players such as Navaya Sharma, James Minto, Noah Thane, or Will Smale. To have those on your bench as your 5 million or below players who might get a chance. And if not them, there's plenty of 5.1, 5.2, or 5.3 million players that play. So you can really try to get some cheap options on your bench that can give you a lot of cover, a lot of variability, a lot of maybe even outside differential options for a couple of weeks. Elsewhere in the team, as usual with fantasy cricket, all-rounders are super, super important. Getting those slots right is really, really important. Last year, out of the top 12 top scorers, 7 were all-rounders. Because of their game involvement, they're just more likely to pick up points. That also makes them much more stable captains, as they're less likely to blank completely. And finally, on captaincy, I personally think that I'm going to go for my most consistent tactic of captaining an all-rounder for the reasons I've just given. But I also think there's some merit maybe in captaining a batter who's in good form and scoring well because of those bonus points for strike rate I mentioned earlier. If captaincy, if captains captained one of these players who had a really good strike rate in the game and scored a lot of points, that could be really big overall. But I think it's a bit of a judgment call, and I think all-rounders are always safe. And I think there's most of the time I'll go there. There's a lot of merit in that. All-rounders are the way to go for captaincy, and I think there's some really important slots that you should be putting the majority of your funds in and your time into thinking about your all-rounders. Moving on to a Q&A. So I asked for some questions on Twitter, on X, in case anyone had anything they wanted to bring up. So Cricket Draft Insight said both Derbyshire and Glamorgan have triple game weeks in game weeks 2 and 3. How much will that affect your team selection? So I mentioned this earlier a bit, but I'll go back into it again. I think this is going to affect my team selection a fair amount, really. As I mentioned, earlier, I think it's a really good opportunity to have an early rise through those ranks. I did qualify it, and I did say that both sides don't have any super important assets that I would say are essential. So while I think I'm going to try and get 3 players from each team, I've not built my team yet, so I'm not 100%. I think if you don't rate the players on the team, or you don't personally like them that much, then I can see why you wouldn't go for 3 from each team. There are no big T20 names in each squad. No Joss Butlers, Liam Livingstons, I don't know, whoever else is there, Will Jacks. They don't have any of those big players. So I think it comes down to a bit of a judgment call on how much you rate each side and their players. But I would definitely be thinking about having 2 or 3 from each of these sides on your bench in week 1, ready to bring in for week 2. Personally, for me, I think I'm going to spread my funds to have some of these players on my bench, such as Pat Brown with Will Smale, Colin Ingram. But I might not end up going for Glamorgan and Derbyshire players, depending on how game week 1 goes. And I can just bring those bench players in and leave them without getting any more players in with my free transfers. I think that Lancashire two Glamorgan and Derbyshire players in those game week 2 transfers looks like the way to go, I think, because Lancashire have a triple in game week 1. Then you can get the Glamorgan and Derbyshire triple in game week 2 and 3. And in those first 3 weeks, you can really easily sort of switch over after game week 1 and target those fixtures. So I think I'm going to start my season with a few of those players on the bench that I can bring in after game week 1, in for game week 2, and see how that goes. But my team selection will be coming out at another time. So I'll see how that shapes up and how my budget works for that. Charlie Holt says, do you think Ben Kellaway and Rafi Weatherall will get regular game time this season? And the simple answer is, yes, I do. Dan from the official cricket draft team works at Northants. He does a lot of work with Northants, and he has Weatherall in his side. He says he's going to play, and I think he will too. He did well in the county championship when he played, and it seems like he's going to make the steal back to first 11. So I'd say, yeah, Rafi Weatherall looks like a good option if he plays. Pretty cheap, looks good. As for Ben Kellaway, I think he's a little more uncertain because he's only played 9 T20s before. He's not gone particularly well, but he has had a great season for Glamorgan so far in the county championship. With his ambidextrous bowling and batting in form, I think he finds himself in that Glamorgan side this year. I think he does. I think he makes it. I think he's a really good pick as well for his price at 5.2 million. And is a bench player or even as in that starting lineup, depending on how his match involvement looks. So I mentioned in him later on, so stay tuned for that. Go into a little bit more about maybe a strategy around Ben Kellaway. But I think for both of them, yeah, I think they do. So that brings me to this final segment here. I've got 2 players to buy for you, 2 players to avoid, some differential players, and 2 players to watch this season. So players to buy, Michael Pepper, off the top. The Essex wicketkeeper has done an excellent season last year, averaging 44 and striking at 190. And his overall T20 record was pretty good too, which ended with a lot of speculations about a potential England call-up, I remember last year. But this didn't happen. And I think just as well, really, because he's so consistent. And Essex have consistent fixtures throughout the year. And I think he could be a pretty good set and forget player in your team from the start. You put him in, you don't have to worry about the Essex fixtures. You know he's going to do pretty well. You put him in from the start and you can kind of just forget about him for the rest of the season. I know there's a chance he doesn't keep wicket for Essex, so you can always play him as a batter. But I also think that keepers get less catches in the shorter form of the game anyway, so I'm not sure it's a huge problem if he doesn't keep wicket. I think he's a really good option anyway. He gets in on merit as a batter. So Michael Pepper, I think I'm almost certainly going to have him in my team. My other buy is Darcy Short. The Aussie player he's been contracted at Gloucestershire this season, and I think he's a fantastic option for the season. In T20s, he averages 32 at a strike rate of 130 with the bat and 32 and economy rate of 8.4 with the ball. And those are pretty good numbers. And I think he'll play a really crucial role for Gloucestershire as they defend their title this year. I know I mentioned that Gloucestershire's fixtures really aren't very good earlier at the start of the season, but I think out of anyone, the difference here is that you could potentially bench him in week 2 and then only play 1 game. Then I don't know, for the rest of the season he can sit in your team just picking up points in that all-rounder slot, similar to Michael Pepper. So I think Darcy Short is going to be in my team. I think he's a really good pickup. I think, like I said, he's going to play a crucial role for Gloucestershire. You can bench him in those weeks he doesn't have fixtures, and I think I'm going to have him in my team. He's a good buy. Those players you might want to avoid up next. Top, Will Smead. This is a bit of an odd one for me because over the last couple of years in the Blast, Smead has almost been the first name on my team sheet. He's a white ball specialist, although he has actually made some red ball appearances for Somerset's second 11 recently. But in general, white ball specialist, I think. And so I always thought that he would just smash the Blast. And so I've been let down by him a few times over the last few years. And I've actually captained him a few times. He's not done very well. So I think he's an avoid for me. His overall T20 record is not fantastic either. He averages 26. And despite the strike rate being up at 150, that's not bad by any means. But I'm not sure he makes the top 3 batters picks that you can have in your team. I think there's a lot of better options. And I think Will Smead could be a bit of a trap. So I'd avoid him for the start of the season. Obviously, you're more than welcome to go for him if you like. But for me, I think he's an avoid. Next up is Matthew Britsky. Again, perhaps a bit of a bold call. But if you look at his overall batting record in T20s, 29 average at 133 strike rate, it perhaps doesn't scream that firepower that some may expect. And I think this gets worse when you consider the international stage. He averages 16 striking at 122. Again, it's not great. And I think that you're going to want a higher strike rate. And in the T20 Blast, when you can only pick up a couple of players, I don't think he's necessarily one you want to go for. He's not a terrible option, and if you really back him, that's absolutely fine. But I don't expect any massive points from him, at least at the start. So for me, again, one to avoid. Next up, I'm going to go through very quickly just some of the differential picks you might want to, want to look at if you're looking for alternative options that are pretty low owned. So at the top, Del Brevis, 4.5% owned. He had a fairly decent IPL this year, and I think he could be really explosive for Hampshire. Looks pretty good to me. And also at 4.5% owned is AM Gazanfar. He averages 13 in T20 cricket with the ball. He picked up a good IPL contract this year. I think he looks like a good option. I'm probably going to have him on my team, something along those lines. I think he looks like a really good low owned option. Differential pick there. Benny Howell, 3.3% owned, ever consistent, known quality. You'll know he'll get wickets. You'll know he'll help out with the bat. You know he'll do well. Benny Howell looks like a good pick. Finally, George Scrimshaw, 1.6% owned. He averages 22 with the ball in T20 cricket and has done very well for Northant's second 11 recently. So I think he makes that first 11 and I think he goes very well. George Scrimshaw, one to look at. Final section, one to watch. These are two players that you might not want at the start of the season, but they're definitely ones to watch. Ben Kellaway, I spoke about him earlier, and so I won't repeat myself too much, but he's on my one to watch list because I think if he does play for Glamorgan this year, he will be very, very good. But obviously, if he doesn't, or it's not consistent enough, or his game involvement is not consistent enough, I think you should avoid him. But I think he's one to watch for the first couple of game weeks to see how his game involvement looks, see if he plays, and if he does, 100% one to go for there. The other one is David Willey, something similar here. I think he's a decent option. His overall record is good, and he's an experienced player, but he is coming off the back of a pretty poor PSL. In his last 10 games, he's only taken 8 wickets and scored 68 runs. So he's fairly out of form. And this is why he's one to watch for me. Because if he can turn that around and have a good start to the Blast, he's a great option. I think he has really good game involvement when he plays. But if he doesn't, and if he doesn't turn that form around, you might want to avoid him. So again, one to watch there. So thank you very much. That is all the content. This final bit, I've got a league in the cricket draft. If you fancy joining, here's the code on screen. Feel free to join. The more, the merrier. If you get enough people, perhaps I'll put a prize up. Who knows? But thank you very much for watching. I know that was a bit of a long video. I covered a lot of stuff there. Hopefully it all made sense. But thank you very much for watching. I will be back in a few days with my Game Week 1 team selection. So good luck this season, everyone, and I will speak to you all soon.